Hello, this is M.Steed, and this is my 2012 budget podcast, or should I be more accurate, it's the first of two budget podcasts. Today is Wednesday, the 21st of March 2012. I've just listened to the Chancellor deliver his speech, and I must say he was in absolutely cracking form and obviously enjoying himself. And then tomorrow, once I've had a chance to have a good look through this, I'll be posting up a more detailed podcast covering some of the things that I think will be of interest to AAT members. So today is the first. It's just the highlights, so an instant reaction to it. Let's see what we've got on the blocks. Well, I think it's fair to say that this has been one of the most hotly debated and also widely leaked budgets in modern times. Not only do we have in the blue corner gorgeous George Osborne putting on his gloves for the third time, and in the red corner we've got the two Eds, we've got Ed Miliband and Ed Balls, but also there's a third person. That's somebody in orange shorts there who's biffing George from the side. Of course, the Lib Dems are putting in their pennyworth. Their impact, of course, is being felt in terms of the new personal allowance, but as we will see, winners mean losers. And at first sight, and this is just an impression that I've got, looking at the way that the allowances are going to be working from, almost immediately 2012, but certainly from 2013, is that the losers are going to be the pensioners. More on that in just a moment, and more tomorrow when I've had a chance to digest the details. So what do the chancellors say? Normal stuff, the usual school report on the economy to begin with, and quite good reading, I thought it made too. He said he was going for far-reaching tax reform, but he then immediately said, hold on, the tax is going to wait. I'm going to be talking first about our place in the world and our need as the UK to be able to earn our way into the world and to create a more balanced economy, by which, of course, he means, as most people mean when they say a more balanced economy, we need more manufacturing and less reliance on financial services. So, here he said, stability comes first. There's a beastie out to one side here who turns out to be very important. It's the OBR, it's the Office of Budget Responsibility. And they're a kind of an independent watchdog, almost an auditor, if you like, who stand on the side and actually say whether things are reasonable, whether the Chancellor is overstepping himself. They give their own sort of auditor's view of the whole process. And the OBR basically expects us to avoid recession. You may recall that the UK went into a bit of a dip in the final quarter of 2011, so the growth went negative for a short period. But in order to get what they call a technical recession, you need to have 2 quarters in recession. And it looks as though the first quarter of 2012 has not gone backwards, so it's gone forward. The Chancellor did make the point that quite a few countries around, especially those in the Eurozone, are in recession. And he mentioned, Italy, Belgium, I think. And the OBR was a bit pessimistic in terms of forecasts, not just for the Eurozone, but also for the whole world. And of course, the Eurozone, although we're not in the Eurozone, we are affected by events in the Eurozone. So what happens over in the Eurozone is bound to have an impact on the UK. He also expressed some concern about the spikes in the oil price. Obviously, that's great concern to some of our clients who are hauliers, those who depend upon fuel, and also just to us all as motorists. So clearly the spikes in oil prices are of concern. But I have to say here and now that he didn't do anything about reducing fuel duty. So all of those planned increases, 3p a litre from August 2012, look as though they are going to remain. He also spoke a little bit about unemployment, saying that it was expected to peak at 8.7% this year. But the OBR, in its own forecast, says that with all these measures, it expects about 1 million more jobs to be created in the UK in the next 5 years. So that sounds like some moderately good news. And I have to say, all around, and looking in the papers and listening to people talk, there's just a faint sense of a little bit of sunshine around. You know, we seem to have got over another winter, and the flowers are out, and the economy seems to have picked up on that, and people seem to have picked up on that as well. So it's not all gloom and doom. The Bank of England, of course, is out there to target inflation, and he gave a lot of figures about sort of budget deficits and borrowing requirements in 2012. I think the figure he used there for borrowing requirements was around about 126 billion. And that's about £1 billion lower than expected. And he expects that to fall quite dramatically to about 21 billion, which seems to me the most incredible reduction by 2016. So there is no question that deficit reduction is very much his aim. But he also acknowledged that we're all getting older and we're living longer. So he's put some stuff in about pensions. I'll talk about tax and pensions in just a wee while. But he did say that there was a sort of an implicit assumption that retirement ages were going to increase as people remained healthier for longer and lived longer. So there you go. That's sort of general stuff. In terms of the broad business, he basically wrapped us all in the knuckles for not exporting enough. He made the point that the UK exports more to the Republic of Ireland than to the whole of the BRIC countries. That's the Brazils, the Indias, the Chinas, and so on and so forth. So we've got to really double our efforts, and he wants to double exports abroad within the next couple of years, and he's released some money to help people do that. But of course, he's also interested in inward investment, and he talked about increasing airport capacity in the southeast. There was a huge roar in the House when that happened. He wants more private investments in road and rail and London transport. And of course, there he's got an eye to Boris Johnson's election this year. He wants to increase the enterprise zones. Of course, that's good because that's enhanced capital allowances. I think there are currently about 24 all up in the UK, but there are some new ones that he's announced north of the border and another one in Docklands too. So they're pretty good news, enterprise zones. And, if we got clients within enterprise zones, then, we can tell them about the enhanced capital allowance position. In terms of the sort of green bits, the green wash, the renewable energy and so on and so forth, he did say he was keen on renewable energy. Gas was cheap at the moment. He wants gas to be used more. So he's giving some stimuli to the oil and gas sector. Of course, last year he gave them a sort of an almighty biff and a bloody nose by taking a lot of money from them, and there's been a bit of retreat on that. And I think this year he's anxious to sort of come out and show his friendly face. Also, we've had some details which have been announced on carbon price flooring. The rates have been set today, and that will have an impact on our bills. So that's something I may come back to a little bit later in the year. He's also keen on the UK being an innovative country. He wants us to be Europe's leading technology centre and to take on the Germans. Life sciences he's very keen on. So there's going to be a new centre, unbelievably, of aerodynamic excellence and one or two other initiatives as well. So there's some government support out for that. And some new incentives for TV productions and video games and animation. And he said, and this was a great moment in the budget speech, that he was keen to keep Wallace and Gromit exactly where they were. So he didn't want Nick Park and Arbon Animations to sort of go overseas to get better tax breaks. And that was a good moment. In fact, generally speaking, the Deputy Speaker, of course, runs the show on Budget Day. It's the Speaker steps down, Deputy Speaker steps up. I thought he was a bit of a showman too. So there were two showmen on parade today. There was Gorgeous George himself, preening himself, loving it, showman, politician, the whole thing. But I did think the Deputy Speaker was vastly amusing too. He did say something about planning, overhaul of the planning guidance, and as we've heard this before, and it sort of sends shivers down the spines of those who would protect the green belt, that there's a presumption in favour of development. So I don't think there's anything new there. It's just that's kind of old news that's been rehashed. Now, of course, one of the big bleeding sores in the UK at the moment, young people's unemployment, and he's announced yet further initiatives to get apprenticeships up. And also, brand new, as far as I can see, is an initiative such that you not only can borrow money to go to college, but you can also borrow money to help start up in business. So there's a kind of an enterprise startup scheme as well. And that sounds quite good news. More details will come out, no doubt, as the finance bill is published, but that's the basic shape. Okay, let's move on to some tax. Right, now as far as the tax, he sort of opened up by saying that the tax system needed to support work. And immediately, in a lovely bit of economics history here, he referred to Adam Smith, who, of course, wrote that incredibly good book called The Wealth of Nations. How do nations get wealthy? Well, you don't try and do everything yourself, you simply specialise. But Adam Smith produced what are called the 4 canons of taxation, the 4 rules of tax, if you like. That tax should be simple, it should be predictable, it should be easy to go along with to be able to pay your tax. And it's got to be progressive, that is, rich people pay more. Now, the other beastie, we've already talked about the OBR, but the other beastie is the OTS, the Office of Tax Simplification, and they've been doing sort of shed loads of work out to the side. And a lot of their reports on simplification have been taken on by the Treasury, and I think we're going to see a lot more of their reports and recommendations. So the OTS got a very early mention there. But as far as that was concerned, and directly linking through to the OTS's work, George was keen to say that we needed a modern tax system. And of course, to have a modern tax system, the first goal has got to be simplicity. Now, although he didn't say this, I checked on the details a little bit later. The first is a consultation to have small, and I insert the word unincorporated here because it didn't appear in his speech, but small unincorporated businesses with a turnover of under £77,000 to be able to prepare their accounts on a cash basis, so not an accruals basis. And that is a bit of a reverse, isn't it? Because for years we've been looking at the government saying, oh, none of you absolutely must produce it on an accruals basis, and cash simply will not do. So here we are actually going back a little bit, and I think that'll be good. But it's significant on the unincorporated businesses because it means that if you're a company, obviously you won't be able to take advantage of that. Again, right in the fine print, and I'll come back and deal with it a little bit more tomorrow, is that they are also considering in tandem with this a disincorporation relief. Now that is very, very significant for us. And that's something that I definitely want to do some digging on, and I'll see what I can come up with. The significance of the 77,000 is that I might as well put that one in front of you now. That's the new VAT registration limit from the 1st of April. You'll be aware that that's outside the budget cycle, but it sort of coincides with it. He's also talking about VAT reform. There's a lot of zero rates. There's a lot of uneven landscape. For example, we got zero rates on books, but if you go and get an e-book, that's a taxable supply at the standard rate. So there are all sorts of anomalies there, and he's going to have a look at that. He also did say, and this is the bit where I start to get massively uncomfortable, that age allowances are very complicated, and he's looking to simplify those over time. And I always get a sort of a shiver going up my backbone when I hear a chancellor say, we're going to simplify them over time, because that normally means that it's going in the wrong direction. And a very quick look at the detail reveals that to be so. All the headlines, let's address this one now, all the headlines have been on the personal allowance for the under 65s. And of course, the guy in the orange shorts, a.k.a. Nick Clegg and co, have been biffing the Chancellor and saying, come on, up the personal allowance. And of course, that makes great headlines. It gets people out of tax down the sort of lower end of the economic spectrum. And I have absolutely no problem with that. That is absolutely great. Beyond, of course, you've got to recognise it's got to be paid for somewhere. And it just seems to me that the age allowances are being restricted, I think is the best word, for 2012-13. So it's not as clear as we thought we had a few months ago. And then from 2013 onwards, it's going to be more in line with the normal personal allowances. So pensioners who seem to have done very well over the last 4 or 5 years, it seems to me, and my first reaction to this is that they're actually going to start going backwards from April 2013. What he's looking for is a single personal allowance for all. That's everybody, regardless of age. Now, I'll come back and have a look at some of the detail on that when I've absorbed it all, but that's the sort of shape that we've got at the moment. He did talk about state pensions, and he said that's going to rise by £5.30 per week from April. But the bigger picture on pensions, and there are two angles on here. The first is S2P, the state second pension. That looks now as though it's going to be going. There's an awful lot of talk about that, and there's going to be more consultations, more details released on a new single-tier pension. And although we've heard estimates of up to £155 a week, the number that George gave in his speech today, in this political knock-around, this little bit of showmanship, was not 155, but 140. So he did say that we would have more details on that later in the spring. So 52 weeks at 140 is about £7,300. But that won't be for existing pensioners. All the evidence is that that's going to be for new pensioners. And again, we're very light on detail on that at the moment. He did say in response to some backbench comment that, people who got their sort of tax statements from HMRC, if they were under self-assessment, didn't really understand all the debits and credits in there. And indeed, when you see some of the statements that our clients come up with, they do make you scratch your head for a few minutes before you work out what's going on. But he has promised from 2014, so following the trend of a lot of chancellors in the last few years, forward-posting things madly, an annual statement from HMRC from 2014, which is not only going to tell you how much you've paid, but also where it's gone. And I don't think that's substantive at all. I think that's just a little bit of showmanship. But I think some people will sort of enjoy saying, oh, well, at least it went on sort of schools and hospitals and so on and so forth, the NHS. I'm just going to try and pick up on one or two of the little bits of detail on the personal allowance and the age allowance. Now, more tomorrow on that. But effectively, as far as the under 65s are concerned, all the news really starts in 2013. And he's going to increase that personal allowance to, and here's the figure, 9,205. 9,205. So we've got just over 8,000 for the 2012-13 tax year, and then it's going to jump quite considerably to 9,200 odd next April. That's April 2013. But of course, when he gives with one hand and takes away with the other, when he increases the personal allowance, what he's doing is to reduce the basic rate limit. And that's the basic rate limit. When you add that to the personal allowance, that will give you the higher rate threshold. So just to be clear about the language there, because it is easy to confuse them, the higher rate threshold, which is the rate at which the higher rate of 40% kicks in, that is the total of the personal allowance and the basic rate limit. Now, of course, national insurance has completely different language and, upper earnings limits and upper profits limits. They're going to be aligned to the income tax stuff. But of course, that needs to be done by separate legislation. So what have we got here? More detail tomorrow, but the policy objective there is to get everybody under 65 onto a personal allowance that's heading quite rapidly towards £10,000 under pressure, of course, from the Lib Dems. But just be clear about that, folks, that, there's as one lever goes up in tax, the next one goes down. You can't have a giveaway without paying for it somewhere else. Now, what he's saying is that the basic rate limit is going to be reduced, and so higher rate taxpayers don't get, at least we haven't had in this sort of new world, the higher rate taxpayers don't get the advantage. But it seems like that's going to change very slightly. And the words are here that most higher rate taxpayers will get some of the benefit, although the number he's banded around today is that it's going to be 1/4 of the benefit that a basic rate taxpayer would get. So it's not as though only basic rate taxpayers will be able to take advantage of this. Most, or a lot of at least, higher rate taxpayers will also get some benefit, but not at the same gearing ratio. The summary of the impacts here, I'll probably give you more detail on that tomorrow, but of course there will be some losers there, especially those with incomes above around about 118,000, where the personal allowance has been reduced to zero, and therefore they're not going to benefit at all from any increase in the personal allowance. And I think he reckons about 500,000 individuals will be affected by that. But of course, the key thing for us at this point is to appreciate that we've got what the economists call fiscal drag in action. And that means that because the high rate threshold is going to be effectively reduced, then more people will be paying higher rate tax. And on the numbers, it's something like 300,000 extra people will be brought into higher rate tax. I'm going to try and get a little bit more detail on the age allowances, what they call the higher personal allowances for people who are 65 to 74 and 75 and over. So that's another one of these, yes, we're forward posting. The main parts are going to be happening from 2013 onwards. What's he trying to do here? He's trying to get, and just to repeat this point, his goal is a single personal allowance for all taxpayers, regardless of age. That's the message that I pick up from the Chancellor today. And I think what he's trying to do is to say, I want tax relief spread more evenly and fairly across working age people and pensioners. But of course, the subtextual message there is very, very strong, that if I'm going to make it better for working taxpayers, I've got to take it off pensioners. And that does seem to be the message. More details of that once I've had a chance to digest it. The immediate message for age allowances is that we've got an age allowance of 10,500 for 2012-13, and that's available to the 65 to 74s, but there is going to be some restriction to that in terms of age, so not everybody in that age band is going to be eligible for that. And the age allowance of 10,660 from April 2012, and that's, remember, broadly for the 75s and overs, that's also going to be restricted to people born before, and I think the number was April 1938. So looking forward, it seems to me that the pensioners are going to be paying for the working people's increase in their personal allowance. And of course, that really is a bit of a blow, isn't it? Because most pensioners are living on a fairly meagre income, and to have a double whammy like that is not going to go down well. More detail on that later. As I said, I'm just giving an impression in this first podcast here. Right, well, as far as sort of employee taxation is concerned, a couple of other announcements in today's budget. The first of these is the car fuel benefit charge. And remember, this is just for employees with company cars who receive free fuel from their employers, and where they don't have to reimburse the employers for the private use of that fuel. So basically people who are given a company car and free fuel. There aren't that many of those, certainly not amongst the clients that I act for, and I suspect that's true across quite a bit of the AAT MIP spectrum. So what's happening here? Well, the number, of course, is the so-called multiplier, that you take the percentage from the car calculation, you bring it across to the fuel, and that's going up from 18,800 to 20,200 from April 2012, and then it's going to increase by 2% above the rate of inflation beyond that. So, it's all about getting money into the public coffers. It's nakedly just another way of raising some tax. Oh yes, his other announcement was in respect of company car tax rates. But again, this is looking quite a ways forward about how to calculate the appropriate percentage of the list price. He said that from 2014-15, he's going to add 1 percentage point for cars emitting more than 75 grams of CO2, up to the maximum of 35%. And the reason, of course, that he gives such long forward notice of this is to allow the manufacturers to actually, deal with that and try and make their cars ever more fuel efficient. So that's 2014, and I'm not going to get wildly excited by that at the moment. That's something I think for the motor trade. Okay, well, as we head on down to the end of this appreciation of the budget highlights here, Just a little bit on corporate and business taxes. What's going on here? All chancellors love a rabbit out the hat, don't they? It's just one of the things that they do. And, I'm not going to cut it by this. I'm not going to cut it by that. I'm going to cut it by that. And everyone's sort of up on their feet and roaring. And I have to say it was a bit of a circus, but it was quite a good-natured circus in the House of Commons today. So what's going on? From April 2012, he's reducing the main rate of corporation tax, and he's cutting an extra 1% off that. So instead of being 25%, he cut it by an extra 1% last year, and it would then have gone down to 25% in April 2012. Guess what? It's the same rabbit as last year. He's knocked another 1% off. So the main rate of corporation tax for most companies is going to be 24% for FY 2012. That is for corporation tax accounting periods commencing on the 1st of April. And then the next year, April 2013, it's going to go down to 23%. And what he's trying to do here is to reduce the main rate of corporation tax for most companies down to 22% by 2014. And of course, what he's really trying to do is to make the UK more competitive, to signal to the wide world that we're ready and open for business and we want people to come and invest in our country. But just to be clear about that, that is the main rate of corporation tax. There is no change to the small profits rate that is been at 20% for a short while now, and that is not going to change. And I can't see it changing personally because of the uneven pavement between incorporated businesses and unincorporated businesses in the UK. So that's the main bit there. As far as the VAT registration threshold is concerned, that, as I think I said, is going up to 77,000 in April 2012. And following this Office of Tax Simplification review of small business taxation, as I said, we're going on to this consultation to get the voluntary cash basis, but only, it seems, for unincorporated businesses up to the VAT registration limit, with a view to getting this in place in 2013. So that's still a year away. But because I think he's reckoning that that's going to be quite interesting, then, as I said, a disincorporation relief too is on the cards. The last big announcements that are going to be headline grabbers are the ones that have been sort of kicked around for the last couple of weeks, and that's on stamp duty land tax. Now, there are two things here. He's been under pressure from Vince Cables and others to sort of have a mansion tax on properties notionally over £2 million. And the other thing that's got people very excited is something that's been going on for years, and that's a stamp duty land tax planning point by which, instead of having properties standing alone such that when it changes hands you have stamp duty land tax, remember, always paid by the buyer at rates of up to 5% on residential property and 4% on mixed and commercial property. He wants that, and a lot of people want that to go up. So today the Chancellor announced that on normal purchases, that's not in corporate wrappers, I'll come on to that in a second, but a normal purchase of a residential property is going to be charged at 7% of the chargeable consideration when that's more than 2 million. So that means we've got a sort of a normal nil rate band, then we've got a 1, a 3, and then a 5% band was introduced last year, if you remember, for properties over £1 million, and now a new 7% band for properties over £2 million. So if you bought a £2 million property, your increase is going to be from 5 to 7. That's 2% of 2 million. Well, that sounds about like 40,000, doesn't it? So there's a bit of extra tax to pay there. But I guess he's taken the view that if you can afford a £2 million house, you can afford to give me, the lovely Chancellor of the Exchequer, another £40,000. And that's going to be from midnight tonight. So that, I guess, is the nearest we're going to get to a mansion tax. It's not quite what Vince Cable and co wanted. They wanted an annual tax And of course, although some political commentators are already saying this is a mansion tax in all but name, it's not. And the reason is that, of course, you only pay stamp duty land tax when you buy a property. If you then keep it for 20 years, you don't get any further exposure to SDLT, whereas the mansion tax has wanted an annual charge, and it doesn't seem as though we've got that. But the one that really, I think it just attracts attention, it's not going to be very important for most of our clients, but I just want to spend a minute or two on it and know more, and that's talk about the use of corporate wrappers. So what's going on in this use of corporate wrappers? The phrase that HM Revenue and Customs are using is the phrase enveloping of high-value residential properties, which just means that your lovely big expensive house in Alderley Edge or London or Bristol or whatever it is, instead of just standing alone, is inside a company. And instead of owning the property, you own the shares in the company. And of course, these companies are very often in offshore locations. And I think it's fair to say that most of these, at least as far as the very expensive UK properties are concerned, are actually in the Isle of Man, these offshore companies. And of course, the minute you use the word offshore and tax, it raises lots of hackles. So what's this going on? Well, it's simply saying, this is George saying, that there's a lot of money lying around that's not being collected because people are using these fancy planning schemes. Of course, he uses the phrase avoidance schemes, but we can think planning. So, I've indeed often recommended that people hold high-value properties in companies. There could be issues getting them into the companies, but once you're in, you tend to be home and dry, because then any subsequent change in the ownership of the company simply gets taxed. And here's the punchline: to stamp duty at 0.5%. And of course, that's very different to the high rates that we've had up to today of 5%. So what would you rather pay? Would you rather pay 5%, or would you rather pay 0.5%? Not much of a decision to be made there. But here's the point about these corporate wrappers, where they're owned by offshore companies. He has introduced a new rate, a mega new rate, and this one's pretty evil. It's at 15% of the consideration of the property. So that is actually quite bad news. So in summary on these SDLT provisions then, the Chancellor looking to introduce legislation into the Finance Bill to provide these what they call non-natural persons, that is, for which think offshore companies, is going to be hit with this 15% SDLT rate. I'd need a bit more detail on that. It's not quite clear what that 15% is charged on, whether it's the value of the property or whether it's the value of the shares. So we'll have to wait and see what's going on there. But effectively, he's put all people who have properties, the oligarchs and rich footballers and film stars who own a lot of London properties. And remember, London property is considered to be very, very stable, very high value, and a very good investment because it appreciates in value quite well. So George is just putting anybody on notice that if you want to hold that, you better hold it properly. Don't think that you can get it through an offshore company. Right, so what else did the Chancellor say today? Well, the usual stuff on duties. He referred to his alcohol strategy and so forth. But what he did say was there are no changes to those already announced. And that means that all the stuff that we heard about last year is simply going to be nodded through. Smoking, of course, he doesn't like smoking at all, and he thinks that all smokers are causing preventable diseases. So his duty on all tobacco products is going to rise by 5% above the level of inflation. So it's the usual, let's bash the drinkers, let's bash the smokers. Gambling came into his sights too. There's been some talk and indeed a proposal now for a new duty on sort of fruit machines in pubs and piers and amusement arcades. And there's a sort of rather sticky interaction between the VAT and the excise duty on that. And so he's going to make the VAT liability and the excise liability much clearer with a new machine games duty, which is going to be set at 20% with a lower rate of 5%. But he did mention, made quite a bit of a mention of offshore gambling. A lot of people gamble on websites, And the where that's taxed is causing a bit of a problem. So in effect, it's rather like the place of supply for internet services where they're supplying to individuals. I suspect, just hearing him talk, that he's going to borrow the VAT rules on place of supply for internet services, and he's going to tax these remote gambling supplies, for which think internet gambling, where the service is consumed. In other words, it'll be in the UK. Fuel, no further changes to his plans. So as I said earlier in the podcast, I expect that 3p per litre rise in August to go through, but there will be plenty of, squeals there. And I have to say a little bit of political room there for him at the last moment to back down if he thinks it's politically expedient, and seeing what the new fiscal year brings. Right, well, that pretty much concludes my review of the budget. This sort of bit of a firing from the hip reaction to it. But of course, like George, I've left the one of the most politically sort of hot topics until last, and that's the 50% tax rate. This is a difficult one for a chancellor to call, because a lot of people would say, well, the rich need to pay more and they need to contribute more. But the other side of the coin, and a lot of pressure from Tory backbenchers here, is that it's a headline rate. It doesn't look good in the world. It's one of the highest in the G20, and it's widely acknowledged as basically hurting the UK economy. So he did make a bit of a bold move here, because instantly Ed Miliband leapt to his feet and started attacking it. This is a budget for millionaires, all the usual stuff. But he has decided to cut the 50% rate to 45%, and that looks like that's going to happen from next year. So there's another one of these year-away jobs. So it looks as though we got the 50% rate for 2012, and then it'll go down to 45% in 2013. I think it needs quite a lot of advertising, a lot of smoothing. But the question simply is, how much does it bring in? And it was reckoned to bring in $3 billion. And when you factored in all of the extra bits and pieces, people, saying, well, I'm just going to move out and I won't be paying that, and therefore there are knock-on effects because I'm not spending elsewhere. He reckons it only brought in last year £100 million. So it's not a great money earner. The self-assessment receipts were actually about 3.6 billion lighter in January of this year than he expected, and he thought that a considerable proportion of that was due to people simply saying, I'm not paying 50% tax and I'm off out and I'll come back when it's going to be reduced to a more sensible level. So he's taken this sort of political gamble that the 50% rate raises little and damages much, and he's hoping that the SDLT changes will more than compensate. And the Office of Budget Responsibility, the OBR, has actually passed judgment on this, and it seems that it is happy. Child benefit, of course, that's another political hot potato, isn't it? And there were proposals from 2013 that this should be reduced for sort of, higher earners. And you had what David Cameron called the cliff edge effect, such that if you were earning 40,000 quid, then you would get all of your child benefit. And if you earned over that, you would lose the lot. And that's per person. So if you had one household where you had two people earning 39,000, you'd get your child benefit. And if you had compared that to another household where you had one person earning 60 or 70,000, they would have lost the lot. So there was clearly a discrepancy there. So the announcements today, and I'll just give you a sort of a feel for them, it looks as though people in the bottom end of the higher rate band are going to do better. And he's reset the threshold at 50,000 and then a taper relief going down to 60,000. So you don't have a cliff edge, you have a gentle taper between 50 and 60,000, and it'll stop when you get a household, or a single person, I think it is, that's earning 60,000. So you still haven't taken away that discrepancy between two earners versus one earner. But it looks as though he's addressed some of the problems. We'll have to see the details of that in a few weeks. Right, well, I think that's pretty much it. We've covered most of the bits that I wanted to cover here. I loved his closing comments there. He talked about the British, and their sort of, the way that they're very good at getting themselves out of trouble when things are bad. I guess a bit of Dunkirk spirit in there. And his final comments, which I love, were, "We borrowed our way into trouble, and now we're going to earn our way out of it." I like that. Cheerio.